wait.
We might get to,
I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole for the Village of Cary for Tuesday, November 19th, 2019 to order with roll call, please.
Kraus?
Here.
Betts?
Yes.
Weinhammer?
here,
Cavelli? Here. Collier?
Here.
McAlpine?
here,
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll now go to the public comment portion. Is anybody here would like to address the Committee of the Whole before we get started? Anybody here? We'll go and close that at 6:57. And we're going to rev up right now and have a discussion about our tax levy for 2019, 2020.
Here I am. Thank you. As everyone knows, Village of Cary is a non-home rule community, which means, of course, we're subject to the tax caps. This year, we are allowed, based on information I received from McHenry County, to increase our levy, if we choose to, by a total of $54,490, which is composed of a growth element and the CPI. For truth and taxation purposes, we are required this evening to provide an estimate of what our tax levy will be for the upcoming year, and then there's a 20-day period before we can formally approve it. As much as I would like to receive the entire $54,490, I know we've had this discussion in the past, and the board is sensitive, very sensitive to the property tax increases. The recommendation that we propose is to just increase the levy by the amount of new growth, which is $6,502, which is similar to what we did last year with the tax levy. At this point, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
So we have those same options as we had last year. We can keep the tax levy extension the same as it was. We can do the new growth, which is recommended by staff. We can accept the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, or the Consumer Price Index and the new growth. So the board has four options here for consideration. Would like to get some consensus here tonight so that we can draft the ordinance, and we plan to bring it back to the village board at our second meeting in December.
So I know I asked last year, and I want to ask again, can you just clarify the new growth definition?
the
New
impact.
growth would be new properties that have come into the Village of Cary and have been added to the tax rolls. The amount of that growth is defined by McHenry County, and that is what they have provided to us. What that means to the average resident is, in essence, the average resident's tax bill should not increase at all by the addition of the new growth to the tax levy. Those taxes would be paid by the new businesses coming into the community, so they would have should have no impact on the residents that are currently here in their tax bill. I want people to understand, and I think I have said it every year, what we're talking about tonight is the Village of Cary line that appears on people's tax bills. We cannot control the other taxing bodies and what they increase their levies by. To give you an idea, the Village of Cary line on the average tax bill is probably around 5% of what the total bill is. So the impact we're talking about here is extremely minimal. Does
Thank you.
that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
And remember, we have a looming pension obligation, an additional $180,000 that we have to come up with moving forward to this.
Yeah, I just think that it's important that we look at the big picture, and that is that this compounds. So if we don't take it, we don't have that opportunity to gather the following year. So it can keep on compounding. When we add something new, I think one of the benefits you have from adding something new to your tax base is being able to generate some of that additional income without it costing the taxpayers any money.
Right,
It's
$6,500
not a
may
lot,
not
but-
seem like a
But it
lot,
compounds.
but imagine year after year after year having that $6,500 available to you in your tax levy. That's why I'm always willing to take whatever it is that the board sees fit to approve.
Well, we're looking for a consensus here where everybody's at. Just take a straw poll here. Anybody on this side want to go for anything more or less than what's being proposed right now, just the new growth?
I'm fine with the new growth. As you had said, it's not going to impact any of the current tax households, the taxpayers of the current
As
homes.
a matter of fact, just as a point of reference, I can speak to my own tax bill. The village portion of ours went down last year because of this, and we will reap the benefits of this for years to come.
I'm good with new growth,
It's
too.
the smart thing to do, I think. I mean, I know I look at all of our partnering taxing districts right now that are, like D26 is increasing theirs by 3%. I think D155 is increasing theirs by 2.75 or so. It's under 3. But, we remain to do more with less. And I think it's important for us because part of the deal with capturing new businesses and getting new construction is that we'll be able to reap some of those rewards without impacting the residents' bottom line when it comes to the village of Cary. And New growth.
New growth.
New growth? Yes. Well, we'll still put this on items for separate action, the next board meeting. So we're going to go with the new growth.
Second.
On the 17th.
On the 17th, yeah.
Sorry, what did Kim say? Did you
No,
say
I won't be in favor of anything.
you're not in favor of it? Okay.
Okay. Speaking of fees, we're going to talk about commuter
Mike.
parking fees. Thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Committee of the Whole. This evening, the staff would like to present some information just for your consideration and discussion, sort of a bit of a preview ahead of the budget season. One of the items that we've been reviewing and then analyzing some various factors that have come up recently and been on our radar for a bit that would affect our commuter parking fund, and particularly our commuter parking maintenance. So this evening, we're going to give you some information on some different factors that are going on and that are in play, as well as some different options for the committee to consider and discuss further when we get to the budget process. The first factor that I'd like to go over is something that was introduced earlier this year. The governor had signed in Senate Bill 690, which in essence implemented a parking excise tax that does go into effect January 1st of 2020. And one of the reasons that it had been in our radar is that this, at the time of the law being established, it was not clear whether or not this would impact municipal parking lots, such as our commuter parking. Since the creation of our packet and our presentation, in fact, this last Friday, House Bill 3968 was introduced, and that was on the 15th, which would, if passed, exempt municipal parking lots from the tax. So currently, that's still a possibility that it will affect our fund, but it is something that's out there that we need to be considering as we move forward. Because what it would do if it were applied to municipal lots is that it would add a 6% tax that would be required to be paid by the owner of the parking lot, in this case being the village, which in essence, if we didn't raise our rates or adjust our rates, obviously would produce less revenue for our operations and maintenance and future capital projects, or require an adjustment moving forward. But good news is that there is proposed legislation that could exempt our municipal lots, and that's something that we will continue to watch as that goes through the process in the spring session. Some other factors that are out there that affect our parking fund are listed here. First one is rising maintenance costs. I think as our finance manager and directors would attest to, commodities and prices of goods and services tend to increase year to year, while our parking rates, whether it be for our quarterly permit fees or for our daily fees, have stayed unchanged for many, many years. the cost to continue to maintain our parking lots, our street lights, and other items have increased. So that's moving forward. We'll see some slides with some more numbers and items of maintenance that are going to be in the horizon. Just keeping in mind that the costs for these will be increasing while our revenues are relatively flat. Next one, our new Metro Depot. So not only do we have existing infrastructure to maintain, we also have new items that are our maintenance responsibility. We do have the wonderful new station that just opened earlier this month to the public and for commuter use. However, through the process, the village now does have the new responsibilities to maintain that building. So there are operational items and fixed cost items that we do have to be considering moving forward. Luckily, it's a new building right now, but over the years, there'll be dollars and labor that we will have to attribute for that service. And then thirdly, some unbalanced parking utilization, which I'll go over in a minute. We have certain lots that currently are more highly utilized than others, based primarily on geography and our current structure. So as I mentioned, the maintenance side, we have 3 areas of maintenance that the parking fund does pay for. It will be one, the new Metro building that I mentioned. And those are just, I won't read them all, but just some of the items per the intergovernmental agreement with Metro that the village has to consider moving forward. We are also responsible for parking infrastructure. So that's all the hard services and hard infrastructure that you see out there, the pavements, the curbs, the lights, the signs, and so forth. And then last, we have operations and maintenance. The biggest ones there would be the snow removal services. So the village does perform for the smaller events that task in-house, but when we have bigger snow events, to make sure that we're hitting the roadways as effectively and efficiently as possible, we have a contractor that comes in and does that service. And then there's other things like street sweeping, janitorial services on the new building, mowing, and so forth that we also have to budget for. And then capital projects. There's still some other bigger projects on the horizon in the metro area that the village is planning in our multi-year CIP, most of which has been presented in past budgets and then are coming up for implementation in the next couple of fiscal years. Some of the big ones are pavement resurfacing. The south lots in particular are of a current pavement condition. You can see one example photo there of the pavement surface. They do need to be addressed in the near future. There's another phase of our metro station project, the remaining portion of the platform and pedestrian crossing at the western end in partnership and in process with the Union Pacific Railroad. There'll be new gates and signals added at that crossing. And then, of course, with the new building open, we now have to work on the process of coordinating with the railroad for the demolition of the existing building and then the site restoration for the land where the current building is located. So that being said, this is from our last capital improvement program workshop and budget process. So our 5-year CIP that had estimated about $1.77 million of potential projects, most of them encompassing the maintenance and operations, plus some of those capital projects that I had mentioned as well. And based on the current revenue projections from that last budget, we're estimating about $1.15 million of coming into the parking fund via the quarterly permit passes and the daily fee parking. Keeping in mind that a portion of that difference that you see there are the capital projects, particularly with the pedestrian crossing project and the demolition of the old depot. The crossing project does have some grant money tied to it from the Federal Railroad Administration, but by and large, most of those costs will be borne and need to be borne by the village via the parking fund. I mentioned parking utilization. This sketch here just shows the current configuration of our commuter parking lots. I think many people are probably aware, but just for the benefit of those that aren't familiar, the lot in green, which is on the north side of West Main Street, that is a parking lot designated only for holders of quarterly permit passes. So people that park, commuters that park in our lots that want to pay just the daily fee rate and maybe aren't regular users or very highly frequent users are limited to parking only in the lots shaded in yellow. And if you have a motorcycle or have the appropriate placards for handicap accessible parking, those two are in the middle there in the blue and the red. And then our multi-day parking, so if you want to park overnight for multiple days, that is limited currently to the far southeastern lot. So as we have it right now, because of our permit-only restrictions in the green lot, on the days where people that hold those passes don't necessarily commute every single day. So there's often certain days, I think particularly Fridays, where you'll see that lot is only partially filled, despite the fact that the daily fee lots, especially the far northern lots, the northeast, and then the northern half of the south lot, just south of Main Street, those lots will still remain highly utilized, even though there's a lot of spaces very close to the platform and the crossing unutilized, just because they're not in use by the permit holders. So there are a few options just for the committee's consideration as we head toward the budget season. The first one will be no change. So that obviously would be maintaining our current fee structures for both our daily fee parking and our quarterly permit passes. Positives are obviously that there's no increases for the users of the commuter facilities. Drawbacks, though, are the rising costs that I mentioned for our other commodities, services, and operations with a flat revenue structure. Second option would be to increase all the parking fees. So one option could be to just increase the daily fee by a certain amount for those daily fee parking spaces, and also consider raising the rates of all the permit passes to a amount that the board would be comfortable with. The third would be a bit of a hybrid of 1 and 2, and create a tiered parking fee structure. So one proposal that we'd like to present for your consideration is to allow for higher fees in some of the more desirable parking spaces, effectively creating some premium parking zones, and then also implementing a tiered fee structure for the permit passes, having a different rate, a lower rate for Cary residents and a slightly higher rate for non-residents. I'll show you these next slides, kind of how that structure works and how it compares to our current system as well as to our neighboring stations on the Northwest line. So in terms of the parking lot configuration, what I show here is just one sample of how a tiered pricing structure could look like. The amounts, obviously, we review and discuss with the board further, but for the sake of the discussion, we did plug in some numbers here. What we would in essence is have all the parking spaces available for any holder of a parking pass or a daily fee. So if you do buy that quarterly permit fee, or quarterly permit pass, I'm sorry, you could park in any of the spaces, regardless of their designation as a standard space or a premium space. And if you buy the space on a daily fee basis, depending on which space you purchase or use that day, there'd be a different pricing. So the ones that are more highly desirable and closest to the crossing and to the access of the platforms, which would be designated in purple, we would suggest having a slightly higher daily fee than the other spaces, which would be closer to existing, or an option could be to keep those the exact same rate as they are now. But in essence, a slightly lower fee. We do recommend that we would keep handicap accessible spaces free of charge as they currently are. And then the other change we would propose is that motorcycle parking, which currently takes up about the equivalent of 6 to 10 spaces in the lot. They are currently not charged any fee. What we would suggest is that we would stripe out motorcycle parking, which they are smaller than a standard space. You can fit approximately 2 motorcycles in the space of 1 standard parking space. And then having them, even though they're in a prime location, give them the same pricing as the standard parking space. In terms of comparison to the other stations in the Northwest line, I show our current $1.50 per day in red here at the Cary station, our proposed standard space amount, which could be $1.75, and then the premium space, a quarter more at $2. As you can see, the pricing per space per day along the line varies kind of all over the board. The average being $1.76 if you average all the stations on the line. So our proposal for the standard space would still be in line, slightly less than the average that's experienced out there. Okay. In terms of the quarterly permit fee, the resident rate, like I mentioned, we would highly suggest that the resident rate be not significantly higher than what it currently is. Right now, it's $95 per quarter, and we are suggesting a slight increase, about $100 per quarter, which still keeps that below the UP Northwest line average, which is $121 per quarter.
Eric, real quick, on this slide, so Crystal Lake, Woodstock, Harvard, and McHenry, they don't charge at all?
It says not applicable because they don't offer quarterly passes.
Okay.
They only have daily fee
Thank
only
you.
at those lots.
Okay.
Yeah, but Woodstock and McHenry, they don't charge for parking at all.
Yes, and then backing up one slide, as the
Okay,
mayor
yeah, I
mentioned,
couldn't get through that whole slide real quick.
there's 4 stations on the line that don't charge at all for any parking.
Okay.
You beat us to it.
What?
I said you beat us to it. We didn't get that.
Well, we just had this kind of, yeah, I think that might be changing in Woodstock.
And then our suggestion for a possible structure for non-resident quarterly permits, $120, so an increase of about $25 per quarter. That is actually still lower than the network average as far as non-resident rates. A lot of stations charge the same for residents and non-residents. Some do have a difference, but that average is $123 per quarter. One thing to note, the Village of Barrington, just this past year, they implemented and were the first to implement a tiered structure with some premium parking. They applied that just for their quarterly, or actually there's an annual permit, but the quarterly equivalent for those premium spaces is $300 per quarter. So it's a new structure. They're the first one to implement, and we're suggesting something slightly similar, but applying it also to the daily fee spaces as well. And then this just summarizes those structures that we just mentioned before. As I mentioned, our current structure is $95 per quarter. And if you were to calculate that, making the assumption that you parked 5 days a week for every week in that quarter, that's 65 days. So you'd be spending, if you were going daily fee, slightly more than you do now with the quarterly permit. However, if you compare that to going to our tiered structure, if you didn't increase the standard space to $1.75, it would cost you for that same quarter $113.75, which again still gives you a discount at the resident rate and a slight increase in the non-resident rate. However, if you were to pay every day in the premium spaces, that dollar goes up a little bit more, $230 per quarter. So again, even the non-residents with the permit passes would be seeing a discount.
And how are you going to monitor that, resident versus non-resident?
When they come in and get their pass.
So they have to come into Village Hall to get a pass if they're doing that? Okay.
Yeah, we've
That makes-
got
I'm
that
just
information.
curious, because I'm like, otherwise, how do you know?
Yep, that's the current process. It would be, I won't say impossible, but highly impractical to do that on the daily fee spaces.
Right.
But that is an easy way to do it with the finance operations on the quarterly passes.
Finance has a log of all the individuals right now that have passes of their address and information. So we'll try to do our best.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I just didn't tell you could monitor it if they
You
didn't.
already have a list? How many are non-resident right now?
I don't know the exact numbers, but
It changes quarter to quarter, but at least for the fourth quarter of this year, about 36% of the total pass holders were non-residents. And I know you probably can't read this. We also did a little bit of research on
I
some of
can
the other
still read.
metro lines that are out there, particularly stations that are of a similar distance to downtown Chicago that Cary is. And just kind of giving you a summary on the North Central service line, most of those stations out there are charging a daily fee between $1.75 and $2. On the Milwaukee District North line, about the same, $1.75 up to $3, and then between 3 and 5 on the UP North line, which goes out toward Waukegan. So again, our suggestion is, or our point to this is that there are a variety of fees being charged on the different lines and different stations, and we wouldn't be the first to change and differ from the standard. A lot of the stations on the North Central service in particular have recently done a lot of price adjustments. Mundelein is one of the ones I noticed just in the last year or two. They just increased their price to $1.75 for mostly the same reasons that we're mentioning here. And lastly, just one option that we don't have to decide upon, but is out there. There could be some openings for reconfiguration of our spaces. Our motorcycle parking is currently in the area in pink. Some of the bicycle racks are usually placed there as well. If we do go to the process of numbering and then charging daily fees for motorcycle parking, we could move them to an area here in the light blue, which happens to be an area where there's a lot going on in terms of this intersection, traffic, movements, pedestrians, and so forth. It would be nice to have fewer cars backing in and out. Motorcycles could be moved there. In the space of what is occupied by 6 parking spaces, we can get 12 motorcycle spaces there. And then this area here that used to be used by the motorcycles could fit 10 new premium daily fee spaces. So we'd actually get a net increase of spaces in that reconfiguration. And with that, I can answer any questions and appreciate your feedback.
I think it's important to note too, I just want everyone to keep in mind, this is a different bucket of dollars than our general fund. So the parking fund is run as an enterprise fund. So this is not related to when we talk about our tax levy, those dollars are not commingled.
When was the last time we had an increase or any change in our fee?
Couldn't find any specific data, but it has been, I would imagine, at least 10 years or more.
Okay.
Not since the 5 years I've been here, at least.
Sure.
How many spots are permit spots out of the 596?
Approximately 280 to 300, I believe.
30. How
Which
many
is-
are used on average in a quarter?
This last quarter, we had 279. That does vary, kind of the 250 to 300 range.
Okay.
So of those 279 current pass holders, they take up that many spaces out of the 616 total spaces in the facility.
Eric, do you have any estimate about how much this would generate in terms of extra revenue?
It would depend upon, obviously, the structure and the tiering that we go with. That's something that I think with the budget discussions, we can try to give a better number. It's a little hard to pinpoint, given that with the tiered structure, it'll be harder to estimate how many of the standard spaces, for example, in the farther lots, how many of those will get utilized still, or will we see a migration of people thinking the quarter per day is worth the extra minute of walking, perhaps.
So, but currently we collect somewhere between like 250 to 300,000. Is that correct?
I think it's right around
Sounds about there.
250,000 plus or minus. Yeah, I think you're right, Trustee Kraus.
Maybe to give you, I can't give you an exact number to answer your question, but at least by a percentage of how much higher these are, if we were to go to $1.75 for the standard spaces, that's about a 17% increase over the current $1.50 per day. And then the premium spaces would be about 33% higher. Now, of course, we have to factor in there's a certain number of spaces that would be allocated to each of those. So we'll have to work with Mr. Ducharme and develop a really crazy-looking formula to estimate that, but we could work on that.
What effect, when you talked about the state, if they pass the bill, what percentage can they tax the parking rate at?
6%.
Can I add something? There also is an administrative rule proposed, Eric, which you may be aware of as well, to exempt municipal lots. So even if that House bill is not approved and signed by the governor, it appears that administratively, lots would be exempted from the state tax.
Yes, there's different avenues with the exemption that could benefit us.
It's trending favorably for us. Correct, that municipal lots will be exempt. But when this was all fleshed out, I mean,
Why wouldn't they pay $2 like everyone else? Why is the recommendation 175?
Well, first, they're going from having it free to having to pay, which isn't I think a factor on its own merit to maybe justify it. But we also look at the fact that when a motorcycle does come in and use our facilities, they take up less space per user than a car.
Right.
So because we're benefiting from getting maybe 12 motorcycles, like I guess, for example, getting 12 motorcycles in what normally would take the space of 24 cars at a 2-to-1 ratio, encouraging more motorcycles, leaves more space for everybody else in the parking lot.
And when those spots are filled, then they would just go to a regular spot, right?
Yep.
We certainly could make it two.
Yeah, that's another option, exactly.
Shocking.
I want everyone to know their options here.
Yeah.
Well, if we are going to do something like this, I like the tiered system, to be honest with you. I think it kind of makes sense. You know, if people want to park further away because they want to pay less, I mean, that's their prerogative. So it gives people options. I do like that.
I would like to get some direction in, ideally in December, as we start putting together our budget projections here in early January. It'd be helpful to know where we are in the rate, just as we start planning the budget. We don't have to make any decisions here today. We could, if the board wants to think about this and absorb the information and circle back at the next committee of the whole meeting, that's a possibility.
What's everybody thinking about an increase in general, regardless of a tiered or flat or whatever? Is everybody in agreement or disagree that we need to make some adjustments because of pending maintenance items?
Yes, I do. I
I'm
think we need
comfortable
to.
with it.
I agree.
Trustee Weinhammer?
Yeah, especially since it's been 10 years or more since there has been an increase. And I do like moving the motorcycles over and then having the additional parking spaces for the cars, for the premium spaces. So those premium spaces there in purple, would it be even more than $2 per day? Or are you guys going to sell the quarterly? How's that going to go?
They would be
Quarterly pass?
premium spaces, at least in this model. Whether you have a quarterly pass or daily fee, you can use any spot. I would probably recommend that those spaces be the same as the other premium spaces. They are physically closer, but we also have to look at where you get into the platform, which actually is over here at the west end or over here at the Main Street crossing.
So those
They're
aren't
kinda-
necessarily like,
Yeah, they're closer, but they're not the closest. The closest are the ones right by the opening, that new ramp and stairway down to the platform, or the ones right here are really physically the closest to the platform.
I mean, have you ever thought about increasing the super premium spots and the people who want to just be able to come in and, run to the train, and make sure that their spot is open? I mean, are they willing to pay more for that?
That could be an option to consider. We threw this one together. I would say we proposed this one.
Compiled
I won't
this.
say throw it together. We proposed this one to give tiers, but try to keep it simple and easy to understand. But that's not to say that if the committee and the board would like, that's an excellent suggestion. That kind of mirrors what Barrington has done. They have, I believe, 3 different rates for their quarterly parking passes. Actually, I think they might have been reduced to 2 now. They just changed it. But in essence, those premium spots that they charge $1,200 per year, those are really the closest spaces that you could literally hop out of your car, I believe, and hop on the platform almost. So it is that same kind of model.
Yeah, theirs are a little bit closer. There are other options certainly that we could explore, but some of theirs are right there where literally you get out of your car and you're on the platform. But again, this was an initial concept here for discussion, and if you want us to explore other options, we can do so.
Well, I like that option for people, like you said, who may want to come at the last minute, guarantee their parking. If there's just a couple, just to see if there's even a demand for it. I mean, you can always change it later, but I could see why somebody might be willing to pay extra if it guarantees them a spot right there. They can come right before the train. I mean, they're saving money on gas as it is.
I also would like to, out of curiosity, either in my opinion, either the motorcycles, if they're going to be in that premium lot, need to pay a premium price, or they need to be moved down to the yellow areas. I don't know why they get to be right at a premium spot. I mean, that's great, but I still think that you need to, I still think from a fair standpoint that if they're going to be in a premium spot, then they have to pay a premium rate.
Okay.
From a management point of view, with our existing pay stations, is that something that could be easily reprogrammed to accommodate things like this with the directly related to parking stall numbers?
Yes, in terms of the computer systems, they are paid per space, and that's how our police department does the enforcement. They're able to tell on any given day if a specific space is paid or not paid. So given that, it should just be a simple matter of assigning in their program a certain rate to a certain space number.
There's also an app, right, that you can go on
Right.
if you don't have time to, what is it called?
Yep.
Park Mobile, okay.
But we also, in
But
the
then you don't get a ticket.
So you really pay less.
in the new train station, there is also a parking kiosk, so you can
Nice.
pay right there.
Very nice. Did we have a resident that wanted to?
Yeah, I was waiting until
Oh,
we're done.
okay.
I told her I'd be with her in a minute. I just want to give everybody else
Okay.
on the committee an
I didn't know if you could
opportunity.
see her.
No, I could see her just
Okay.
fine. Any other questions from here? What direction were you kind of heading? The tiered?
I like the tier.
Tiered? You guys like the tiered? Tiered?
I agree with the motorcycle comment as
And
well.
the suggestions that were made too.
Yeah, the premium. Maybe move them down further too.
Do you want us to look at that Barrington model, like an annual rate, annual fee for the ultra premium?
We could always
Be
look
worth
at.
exploring.
And they also, just as a matter of reference, Barrington also did away with they pay by license plates. I don't know how that, do you know how that works? They have a big thing there. We were on the platform and you pay by your license plate number.
Unless it's a license plate reader,
Yeah, it's gotta be.
come in, but
Lot.
We'll look into the options.
I was just thought if it's a cost savings to manage it or something like that, I don't know.
Well, I know Barrington, when you go to Barrington, there's like no lots available that,
Yeah.
to
They're
park.
full.
Yeah, they're full, yeah.
Exactly, so it's,
That's why they can command $350
right.
a day.
Exactly.
Supply and demand, good old basic economics.
Martha, you had something you had to say?
Oh, that's one quick thing.
Oh.
For comparison, Barrington has 914 spaces in their commuter lot to our 616, so that they do have more spaces than us.
Oh, they have 900?
Oh, and they're still full. We just talked about this today.
Go ahead.
Martha Ritter, 239 North School Street. I was just wondering, are the bicycles going to park the same place where the motorcycles do? Because there's not one thing up there that says anything about bicycle rack.
They don't pay.
Yes, with our bicycle parking, I mentioned the capital project with the demolition of the existing depot. So once that is accomplished, our plan is to, again, work with the UP, but utilize that new open space from the old building site for other uses. One in particular would be definitely bicycle parking.
So is everybody good with the pricing as it right now with the tiered? I like the idea of doing away with just a designated permit area that they can park anywhere they want. That way it frees up, because I do notice that there's a lot of vacancies there. We could be utilizing those spots.
Right.
And I like that the residents get a discount too
Mhm.
versus a
Me too.
non-resident. That's good.
So the fees that you see right now are acceptable, tolerable for what we're doing?
Well, are you looking at putting this on an agenda in the future?
Yeah, we'll talk about it again, but
Okay,
I just
bring it
wanted to
back
get an
then.
understanding.
It'll be
So
on like another COW meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there any concern that with the higher rates, 'cause I think Crystal Lake and Fox River Grove in between were a little lower, any concern that we're going to lose some commuters there?
We
to those
could,
towns?
yeah, we could, but we've got some costs here that we've got to cover. I do anticipate that others will start looking at their fee too. Obviously, Barrington was one of the most recent one. We'll look at it, and I presume that the other communities will as well, so.
Okay. I agree.
All right, thank you. Good discussion. Thank you, Eric. Now on to liquor sales ordinance amendment.
Okay, we come before you today for some conceptual information related to amending the current liquor ordinance as it relates to both fees and some regulatory issues. And this is going to be kind of a joint effort between community development and the police department. We tend to do more of the enforcement, and the community development tends to license, so. A little bit of historical context is that the ordinance that we have now was enacted in 2013. So when we recodified it in 2014, there are some things that didn't necessarily translate or were omitted because they were redundant. So when I looked at the current ordinance, the table of contents had provisions in it that never made it to our ordinance. So there's going to be some changes or amendments that kind of fill those voids as it relates to the ordinances that exist right now. And we've had amendments through 2018 that are included on the online version of our code, so they're current up till 2018. And in 2019, we, not constantly, but we do change the number of licenses issued periodically, so we amend those number of licenses through the enactment of an ordinance, and then we change the way that the record is used during an appeal at the Illinois Liquor Control Commission to use the record that's created by our hearing here. So that was one of the other changes, and then finally, we included in the Class A1, the craft distillers, brewers, and winemakers. So basically what we're doing is we're kind of looking at an ordinance that was initially enacted through some actions in 2013, so we had about 6 years since it was previously enacted. Some of the things that we'll talk about tonight are definitions, some license changes because we have a number of different licenses, and through the analysis of the current licensing scheme by community development, there's a thought process to kind of reduce the number of categories of licenses or classifications of licenses, in our mind, perhaps to make it easier in regards to issuance, and then additional licenses to bring your own alcohol, BYOB establishments, and then a license type that it's a salon license in some communities. We can call it complementary to whatever the business that is being conducted is. For example, a salon, hair salon might offer wine or beer to patrons at a certain restricted amount. So they could use it that way. I've seen them used for appletinis at salons in Deerfield, things of that nature, when I did some research previous to this. Some of the fees that we're talking about, we can discuss when we get to the tables related to the current fees and the proposed fees, and some regulatory issues in regards to what the current license holders will have to conform to in regards to behavior. So first, some of the definitions here are endorsements, and that's going to be something that's kind of a supplement to your license. So you get a base license, and then we're going to talk about endorsements. Some of the endorsements might include catering, or we have like 4 endorsements, I think, that we have proposed for discussion tonight, as well as a catering license that is a standalone. And then video gaming cafe, we identify that as something that is the major focus of video gaming, and that we don't allow them in the Village of Cary. And then what came out of a hearing that we just had was what the standard of intoxication is, because from our standpoint in law enforcement, intoxication could be 0.08 or 0.05 to 0.08 if we could prove that someone was impaired, but we didn't have that definition. So when we were saying that someone was served to a point of intoxication, we didn't have a standard to meet in regards to the hearing that we had. So our current licenses look like this. Currently we have a number of different licenses. Some are redundant to some degree, and some are very specific to certain businesses. For example, the Class I is a liquor license for currently one establishment because it's only allowed in an industrial subdivision that has 55 acres or more. So that basically is establishment on Industrial Drive. And then we have some other license types that kind of overlap each other as it relates to consumption, like Class C and Class A. But there's additional special events that the Class A has. That Class I has one annual beer or wine garden that they could have in addition to their license. And then the Class A1 is for your craft distillers, brewers, and winemakers, which is basically the same as your Class A, except the classification of the business. So this is what we're proposing in regards to the license types. And as you can see, we strike some license types, and then we rename some license types. Example would be the Class C, which was for consumption on premise, now is going to be a catering, standalone catering license. And then the Class G is that salon or complimentary service that's incidentally operation of business, whatever that business might be. Some businesses that have used this are hair salons, barbershops, jewelry stores, things of that nature. BYB or corkage is another new classification. So that's Class H, and that allows someone to bring a certain category of alcoholic liquor onto premise, whatever we want to restrict it to. Generally, it's probably beer and wine. I know sake has been included in there for some of the other restaurant types. Then you can also see that there's another classification of license that includes video gaming. And with that, when we go to our fee structure, you'll see that there's a higher fee for those establishments that want a liquor license, but also video gaming. Anything else? Okay, yeah, well, the endorsements, as you can see here, and you'll see on our next chart, we have brewing, corkage, beer and wine gardens, and I believe there's a catering endorsement as well. So you could have a regular license, and then you get your catering endorsement so you could cater certain events.
One thing just to add from the provision for the endorsement is if you look at our code, as of today, Class A license, Class J license, the different license types have the same language within their license types that allow for beer and wine garden opportunities or things along those lines. So rather than having the code repeat itself 8 different times for each individual license, the endorsement is a way that it will establish that these are additional components that you can add to one of these license types, and that there may be additional fees for providing those opportunities along with that license as well. To try to simplify the code and make it less repetitive from a standpoint of easier to translate.
So this is what it looks like after you get rid of the license types that we struck, and we've added the new license types. So you have A, A, B, C, F, G, H, J, and then JV for the video gaming activities, K for those special events for the Cary Park District, which is still something that we have currently, and then your endorsements, which are outdoor beer, wine gardens, sampling, brewing, and corkage. And as you'll see, I think on the next one, okay, it's going to be in one more section of the presentation, the fee structure that we are proposing for discussion. But what I did here is I went to the Illinois Liquor Control Commission website and looked at their applications for the various different types of licenses that individuals that serve alcoholic liquor can apply for. Generally, those individuals that are, or those businesses that are serving alcohol generally are using that retailer license, and that's at $750 a year. But you see that there's a number of different classifications, and there's a number of different types of fees that are associated with the state licensing. So I think that what I was trying to do here was say that we're not out of line in regards to having different structures or different fee structures for the different types of classifications, because at the state level, they're doing the same thing. So this is what the fee structure would look like in terms of the new classifications. You see that we went from $1,700 and some change to $2,000 for the Class A, just generally. And then at the bottom, you'll see that there's the different endorsements in terms of sampling, brewing, corkage, outdoor beer and wine garden, and then catering. So, for example, if you had a catering business and you had a business where you had on-premise service of alcoholic liquor, you would get your Class A, and then you would get an endorsement for the catering. So that license would cost you $2,250 for both the on-premise service and for the catering, which would be off-premise.
But if you had a Class A with video, then you pay the $4,500, and if you wanted the catering, you paid the $4,750.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, the endorsement is in addition to whatever that base license would allow the business owner, that proprietor to, whatever their business model is in regards to service on premise or service or for consumption off premise, like a liquor store, things of that nature. And then some of the extra regulatory items that have kind of been made aware to me after we had our hearing as it relates to some of the things that are a little bit, I'd like to tighten up as it relates to the way that businesses run or operated. For example, we have a requirement for Bassett at the state level for those that serve alcohol to people on premise, but there's no requirement for the liquor license holder to have a Bassett certification. So we're going to require that the liquor license holder have a Bassett certification as well. And then with the roster of personnel, we have the situation that presents itself is that the business owner has 120 days to allow their employee to obtain that Bassett certification. But for those businesses that don't keep very good records, it's hard to establish when 120 days start. So in this, our suggestion is that the business owners that serve alcoholic liquor for consumption on premise would have to provide us a roster of their personnel so that we have documentation of when their employees begin their service with that particular business. The annual reporting requirement would allow us to determine whether or not it's a tavern or a bar versus a restaurant based on the percentage of sales for alcoholic liquor versus any other thing that they're providing. Sanitary conditions are self-explanatory. It was one of those things that was in the original ordinance in the table of contents, but never made it to the code. So we'll put it in there. Intoxication, obviously, as we had it previously defined, but there'll be a standard so that when we do have an over-service enforcement issue, that we have a standard that we have to meet when we have our hearing. And it's not necessarily because, as it turns out, when you go to a restaurant, there's no implied consent that says that you have to take some type of breath test after you eat. So it's going to be more behavioral based in terms of observations and things of that nature. Bringing unauthorized alcoholic liquor onto a premise that's licensed outside of the BYOB or corkage endorsement or practice. We've had one where when we did a traffic crash involving a pedestrian when we did our investigation, we determined that he most probably brought some alcoholic liquor into an establishment and was drinking that in addition to what he was served. Failure to conform to state requirements would just be something that we can enforce. And then our enforcement authority to include both employees of community development and all police officers and any other individuals that we'd like to confer that authority on to enforce the provisions of this particular ordinance. And so you don't think that I'm being overly strict or suggestive in regards to the regulations in addition to what we have now. This is a checklist that they use for enforcement of it's LC 13 for agencies that have undergone training and have the authority to do inspections on their own. And you can see that there's a lot of regulations as it relates to a premise that is licensed that they have to adhere to both administrative code and statutorily. So what I'm not suggesting is not outside of what they'd have to conform to, with the exception of some of the reporting requirements, such as the roster of personnel and that annual report where we have an idea of the percentage of liquor sales versus anything else that business would sell because they're licensed. Have anything else? So that is the end of this presentation as it relates to items to discuss, and I turn it over to the mayor for further discussion. Unless you have questions. If you have questions, happy to answer them.
Quickly, we've had a couple of eventful issues with through my role as the liquor commissioner, and we've come across some issues with some of our enforcement. So this really kind of tightens things up for us. So when we have a hearing, what I don't know if I think I mentioned, we've had an incident with a liquor license holder here in the last year that's cost the village. Probably when it's all said and done, it's going to be about $15,000 for one incident. And what we've done through the chief's encouragement is when we have a liquor license violation, rather than going straight to a hearing, which costs us money. Every time we have a hearing, we have to have this guy here, we have a court reporter, we have, bring in officers that are typically on overtime, and so the cost keeps going up. So what we tried to do is be proactive and be business friendly and sit down and have a conversation with the liquor license holder about and discuss the violation. We'll come up with a plan that they will have to consent to and acknowledge the fact that they were in the wrong, and we assess a fine for that. And we agree to that, and we go on our way, and life goes on. They've learned a lesson. We'll just make sure that things are up to snuff from now on. Well, what happened with this time, we had actually a couple different meetings in this, and we ended up having a pre-hearing meeting, and we came to an agreement. And we all parted company, and the next thing you know, that they want to go to a hearing. So we went to this hearing where we're finding out a lot of the things that we need to have enforcement, like the employees. She couldn't verify when the employee started and finished, and she's, well, they were within the 120 days, but during the course of the conversation, she had been there for like 6 months. So we want to make sure that we're being very proactive about the enforcement, and that it's very clear for our liquor license holders to adhere this. And it makes it, we have to remember that our liquor license is a privilege. It's not a right in the village of Cary. And we want to make sure that if we're going to be giving a liquor license, that people are going to comply. And it's ridiculous that taxpayers have to bear the brunt of a liquor license holder that is in clear violation. We had to have an attorney for me, which was Attorney Euler. We had to have an attorney for the chief, which was John Kelly. They had to have an attorney. We brought in patrol officers that were being paid overtime to come in and testify. We have staff time. We have all these different other expenses that are just ridiculous. So by cleaning this up and making sure that we know exactly make sure that they know exactly what's expected will help us to run a really clean operation. And that's really what our goal is here. to offset some of these expenses that we're incurring, we do need to look at what our liquor license is, what we can do. Because of the video gaming, since we're a non-home rule community, we're only allowed to charge $25 per machine. But we can charge it in conjunction with our liquor licensing. Now, these are fees that are suggested by staff to offset some of the administrative costs that it does to enforce our current liquor codes. So these are just some strong suggestions that staff has had with regards to this. One of the questions that I have is that we have the Park District one. I get all those liquor licenses for their private parties that they have. So would that go away because the Park District would just have, they would pay a $250 fee, or would that be?
That would remain as is.
Okay.
So presently, the Park District pays a $250 annual fee.
Right.
And then each application that comes in pays additional $50.
Okay.
So that would remain as is in the proposed regulations.
And one of the other things that I wanted to run by the board and this, I have been approached by a couple different business owners about increasing the number of outdoor events. We currently allow one. They've asked if we could do two. And, if it wasn't a controlled thing, they'd have to notify the village. And if that's something that we'd want to allow one and then have an endorsement for a second one, I mean, I'm open to it. I told them I would bring it by the board to see if that's something that people would be willing to do. But again, we've gotten in an incident with a liquor license holder a couple years ago that just went ahead and did it without permission, and it just caused a lot of problems. And so if we have things that are clear and in writing, we can make sure that we're all on the same page. So if there's any comments on that or anything questions regarding to this, now is the time to ask it. I mean, we don't have to make these decisions right now. We can think about these things, but we'd like to know something by moving forward so we could notify the liquor license holders.
What was the Class F again for $1?
Those are not-for-profits.
Okay.
Or things of that nature, those type of special events.
Okay, and what about the Class K, that's 100? I don't remember offhand what those were.
Those special events.
Okay.
Yep.
I got a question. Where are the fees we collect this now, what basket do those go into? Is that
The general fund.
general fund?
Yes, sir.
How are we spending more on enforcement than we're collecting in fees already?
Well, it was
In general?
tough. As the mayor said this last year, we spent a lot on attorney fees related to that one case. So unfortunately, that has caused us not only to look at fees, but our whole ordinance.
I think I like the idea of streamlining things. I also like the idea of setting it aside when there's videoing. When if someone's got a regular liquor license and they don't have video gaming, then I don't think they should pay as much. So I think if they're getting the ability to have video licensing, that they're obviously making the money, and in my opinion, to increase that fee. I like the idea of you streamlining it. I don't know if you used a model of anywhere local that you came up with some of this, or were you guys, did you, Brian, did you look at some other local municipalities when you came up with this?
Yeah, from the endorsement standpoint, there are a couple of communities that utilize that effort. And again, I was looking at, as we administered the code, if you looked at our Class A license versus Class C as an example, they're very similar as far as how they're worded. Mm-hmm. And then with the outdoor beer and wine garden opportunity, I think the language for that is referenced probably 4 or 5 times throughout the liquor code. So by creating a specific endorsement for that, it would be assigned to those specific license types. So it streamlines the code, so it's a lot more condensed, easier to interpret and read, and then imply from that standpoint as well. And then just from discussions with business owners or individuals are in the town or in other communities I've worked for in the past, the license types are, the chief had mentioned there are different opportunities that businesses would like to have that our code does not allow now. So a BYOB or a corkage license, you cannot bring an alcohol, a wine bottle to an establishment that we have in the community currently, but that is sometimes that, establishment may like to have that so that if a homeowner has a specific bottle of wine that they want to bring, they can do so, and you have it there with the meal. Additionally, with the complimentary or the salon service, there are establishments that do want to offer that to patrons, whether it be a barber shop that wants to provide beer for individuals or a salon that wants to have mimosas or similar type drinks. They can do that under these provisions, and it wouldn't be necessarily a full license type. It would be something that they could provide additional services to their customers. I'm aware of a furniture store that allows you to, have a glass of wine if you walk in while you're shopping for furniture.
Anyone shopped at Mariano's? I've gone to Mariano's before I even gotten some wine, but I see people drinking it, and I'm like, hey, let's maybe.
So it's
I'd
just
rather buy more
it's,
food.
yeah, it's not to say that, these license sites will cover every specific case there is out there. There might still be a business model that, we're not aware of that, may come in. They still could propose something that would modify the code, and that would be up to the board's discretion at that point. But it's just to provide some more flexibility in how businesses can serve alcohol, but at the same point regulating, that as well, to say these are the types of services that are out there currently, in the commercial marketplace that, our businesses in town may not be taking advantage of because they may not know that there are options to them. But at the same point, providing regulations that say this is how you can operate or what the requirements would be if you wanted to provide those services.
I got another question. When you looked at the liquor license for video gaming, some established that 3 machines, more 5, some are going to add to 6. Have you looked at tiering it and increasing it for more machines?
We've specifically not from the license type, is basically if you wanted to provide the video gaming, it would be a separate fee for that. From a licensing standpoint, from a per machine basis, the way as a non-homeowner community, we cannot charge for the actual license of a machine more than $25. We're restricted by that from the state. So if you just have the 3 machines, the most we can charge for the license for the machine itself would be the $75.
But the liquor license would be the same if somebody has 3 machines or 6 machines?
It, as proposed right now, would be a flat fee, yes.
Now I might be a little unclear on this, but with licenses, can somebody have like a Class A license and also pay for a Class AV license? Because
They wouldn't do that. They
No.
only get the AV because it encompasses the A as well.
so
Yeah, so yeah, you wouldn't have to do both. You just do either the A and have no video gaming, or AV and have the ability to have video gaming on that premise.
okay. And then you were saying about Bassett training. How would you enforce that? Because like Bassett training is like a certain, it's a 3-year expiration period.
Yeah, for the most part, number one, all the Bassett certified servers are found on the Illinois Liquor Control Commission's website. You can look them up by name. Number one. Number two, although there's a Bassett license under the Illinois Liquor Control Commission, most of the establishments that I know of are now doing that training online. It's cheaper and faster. So that's generally how we've seen that the premises are satisfying that requirement.
Do you guys do compliance checks and check that?
The Bassett training? No, we don't do, only when an incident occurs, and then we look at the Bassett certification they had, and that's how this incident kind of came to our attention. Was the particular individual that was the employee bartender didn't have a current Bassett certification, but the contention was that they were hired less than 120 days from the incident, so they didn't have to have it because of that exemption. However, they were an employee previous to that.
Okay.
So that's why now with a roster of personnel, we can just do that inquiry based on their names, because it's a name check through the Illinois Liquor Control Commission.
So is that just an Illinois law that they have 120 days, or is that just our ordinance?
It's the state, no, it's the state statute.
Okay, state statute? Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure.
And now
I'd like it to
everyone-
be shorter than that, but I guess we can't do that.
Yeah, it was at one time, it was kind of regulated by geographic area, but now everyone in the state has to have the Bassett certification if you serve alcoholic liquor on premise.
I think it's just good standard practice that the liquor license holders and any manager or owner, or anybody that comes in contact with serving needs to have a Bassett. It'll just make our lives so much easier. And one of the things I'd like to make sure that we're doing in our ordinance is when we are issuing liquor licenses, that the business owners are aware that anytime they get a new employee, they have to notify us that there's a new employee.
Yeah,
And that we have a running record. I mean, that's not that many, and it could be really easy to administer, I'm sure.
Right.
But, because I don't want this falling through the cracks again. I don't want them to say, well, they were just hired 120 ago, and she's talking about how she worked there 6 months ago, and it just, it just doesn't make any sense. And we just need to be really cognizant of our enforcement, just so our officers are aware as well. Anybody else have any other questions with regard to this? What does everybody think about these new licenses, fees?
A quick question on one of these. So if I'm a restaurant and I have a liquor license, but I want to have a special event, do I get like do I just get a Class K for like the one-day event?
No, so if it's, from a business standpoint, if it's a restaurant.
But let's say it's outside the restaurant. Like, let's say they want to serve alcohol at 4th of July festivities.
That would be under the license for that specific special event. So if it's like a Main Street Fest or 4th of July, that overall entity would get a license for that event, but we wouldn't have one for each individual.
Okay, so they just get a license event for that day?
They would
that
apply
event?
for a special license, yes. It's
Okay.
that's
Like if
Class
it's a
F.
2-day event, do they get it for each day? Or?
Yeah, it's a Class F license they would get for that event.
It's up to 7 days.
Correct, correct.
Oh, wait, hold on. Okay, so
The Class
for a
F
2-day
license,
event, they're only paying $2?
because they're generally not-for-profit entities that are running those events. So that license type is what we have. Keep jumping on me.
I'm doing it.
The Class F license is what would be assigned towards a special event. So events that we've had in town are the Main Street Fest, the JC's event. St. Peter and Paul has an annual Cinco de Mayo event where they've had on their grounds. The fire department has their turkey raffle and also their water fights. That they've had alcohol. That's the type of license that is applied for that. The special event is specifically was drafted for the Park District at the adjacent community center, where that individuals were hosting events or parties in their facility and wanted to be able to provide alcohol or bring alcohol to those events. So the Park District has a license that they get on an annual basis for the $250 fee that they pay to the village. And then those individual parties that are held there, events that are held, they have to get an individual license for that, and that's a $50 fee that they pay.
Okay.
We can adjust those rates. It's very similar to our last discussion related to
Yeah, I mean,
the parking fees.
$1 for, let's say, a 2-day event, if they're making a large amount of sales on alcohol, and we're not collecting any percentage of that. I mean, $2 that the village gets from that, it just seems really low to me.
And I would also, I pulled up the Illinois Liquor Control Commission applications, and you can see special event retailers, which is kind of mirrors that Class F. They charge only $25. They require a local license and then dram shop insurance. So it's those not-for-profits that have dram shop insurance that have to get that local liquor license to get the state liquor license.
Yeah.
Any other feedback on this? Where is everybody with fees?
I'm fine with the fee structure. And going back to how you said that somebody was inquiring about a 2-day event, I was just wondering about, is it, when we would talk about this later, but just noise,
Just the noise.
the noise with it.
Excuse me.
That's a different discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
because what does our noise ordinance go to, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock? That's when they would typically find it that, pardon me?
It's a different discussion.
Yeah, I know, sorry. I know. Any other discussions on this side? Everybody okay with what you're seeing right now?
Other than the $1.
Except the dollar? Well, that's something that we can,
We'll put a couple more zeros.
Well, put another couple zeros on there.
Yeah.
Or-
I asked 25.
Well, I am fine with the $1 if it's for not-for-profit.
I guess
that's the
maybe, I don't know if there's can be a provision in there, but if you're an event making a lot of money versus like maybe a, I don't know, a church event where maybe you're, I don't know, maybe there's some provision in there over a certain threshold, it becomes this.
I just feel like they're giving back to the community normally. So
I agree with you, but I mean, I don't know, $2?
exactly.
That's 100%.
Let's go to $5.
These are all things too that we can always monitor and review next year.
Get feedback and things. All right, this is great discussion, positive steps. Anybody else have anything else about this?
Great job.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn into executives.
Yeah.
Pardon me? I will entertain, did you?
Did-
Sure, come on up.
You guys weren't having enough fun tonight, so I brought with me, I don't know if you know that we opened a Rock and Chop right next to Happy's. So I figured I'd bring a couple special pieces for you to catch on the way out. This is actually an authentic Jimi Hendrix autograph, which you probably will never get to hold in your hands. You can't find one downtown. The only place I know of around here is probably the Hard Rock Museum, or there's a couple around the world that have them. And then here is Ringo Starr's signed drumsticks as well. Again, limited, it's like number 11 out of 900. So what we did with Rock and Chop, kind of, you guys we wanted to bring more retail, as the one gentleman said here, to Cary. So what I did is I kind of expanded our services and what we're offering. Up front, I have a whole collection, this is basically for my kids, of signed albums, signed guitars, whatnot. We offered a barber in the back. We've got a barber in the back where guys can get a haircut. Our first haircut was actually, believe it or not, a mohawk for an 8-year-old young guy. His mom called us before we were ready to go, but we were able to get it done. So what we're offering is, a fun environment to come hang out, come shop. And one of the things that we wanted to be able to offer as well was, for guys who want a haircut, to have a beer, and possibly, roll out to some tastings as well. I travel pretty extensively, I have, and I'm starting to travel a little bit more again. And one of the things I mentioned to Brian that I'm really starting to see pop up in Albuquerque and Colorado and some fun places are these craft breweries that are expanding into these tasting areas. And they're opening up some very cool places that you can go, and they limit, you're still at a 2 or 3 beer limit in those places as well with beers, ciders, whatnot. So as the culture evolves, I imagine that we'll evolve too. So, I'm working together with Brian on trying to come up with what we think is the best idea there. I definitely don't want it to be a bar. That's not what we are over there. I have Happy's. We're happy with how that's rolling, no pun intended. This really is again, it's my world of bringing together, what people like to do socially with visually fun things. And when I say entertain, I mean entertain the brain, give them something to do. So I think that the thing that I kind of am trying to figure out is, and maybe I can do like the catering add-on, is to have something like that where we host businesses or other parties or whatnot. Because one of the things we can do is I'm capable of actually going through and doing history of rock and roll or pop culture history, so you could have a group in and actually do a real tour, a real education. We're offering that up to the kids as well. I don't know if most of you know this or not, but for the last 3-4 years, I've been a school bus driver during the day. That's what I do. I just recently got back into marketing and product development, but I still handle some early morning routes for a family that runs the Barrington Transportation. So one of the things I found with kids in rock and roll, and I have 4 boys, is that a lot of these kids are starting to lose sight of the culture. It's scary. I've got some high school kids that don't know who Jimi Hendrix is, which I know it's not a life-threatening problem, but it's a problem because it is part of our culture and our history. So, with us opening up something like this, I think it's going to evolve into something that really is super cool for the community. There's definitely things there you just won't find anywhere else. And, you know, I'm more than happy to not only have folks that can go through the concept or the history, but, you know, do it for all ages, and it should be really neat. So anyway, so far so good. Like I said, if you have a chance, stop by, you'll kind of see where we're going with it. But Brian's been great at trying to work with me and come up with a concept on that licensing, because I see you guys are revamping, and kind of see where that takes us. Because I really, you know, for me, I'm not really interested, as I said, in doing, to get a whole nother bar license and do all that. It's just, I'm just really not that. That's not where we want to go. I think the real key is going to be, what can we do for the parties or the events that we want to host, and special events not going to cover it. The catering aspect might. I did have a catering, I had a catering license in Barrington, which allowed us to do those kind of things. And it wasn't a limited one-time event or anything like that, so maybe that's the route we go. But anyway, you guys have had a long night, so thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody want to see these?
Yeah,
Anybody interested?
sure, I'd like to see it.
Let me adjourn so we
Yeah.
can get this done. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss personnel, collective bargaining, Illinois 120/2C2.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are no nays. We are adjourned.
Cool.
Thank you.